about your legal views. Let me ask you about another case. Do you believe that Loving versus Virginia, which affirmed an interracial couple's right to marry, was that wrongly decided?
Senator, my wife and I are an interracial couple, and so if that case were wrongly decided, I would be in big trouble.
Okay, so you do agree with the reasoning of that case, and you're willing to say that. I appreciate that. But you're unwilling to say that you agree that Obergefell and Lawrence were correctly decided. Why is that?
Senator, again, those decisions are binding precedent of the Supreme Court, and I would be bound to follow.
I'm aware of that. So is Loving. And you're willing to tell us that you believe Loving was correctly decided.
The hearing room fell into a sharp, electric silence as Senator Schiff leaned forward, eyes locked on judicial nominee Mr. Tong. Cameras clicked, staffers froze mid-note, and viewers across the nation could feel the tension rising. What began as a routine confirmation hearing quickly escalated into one of the most intense constitutional and moral showdowns seen in recent Senate sessions. Mr. Tong, an originalist and textualist nominee, faced a barrage of questions from Schiff, pushing him to confront the limits of originalism, the power of precedent, and the deeply personal implications of key Supreme Court decisions, including those that protected interracial and same-sex marriage.
Mr. Tong, you just said that you're an originalist and a textualist. So let me ask you, the Emoluments Clause provides that no person holding public office shall accept any present of any kind, whatever, from any king, prince, or foreign state. Do you believe the language in the Emoluments Clause that says any present of any kind, whatever, means any present of any kind, whatever?
Senator, you are quoting the text of the Emoluments Clause, and I cannot dispute with the text of the Emoluments Clause.
So it would apply to any present, including an airplane?
It would apply to the president, I believe, your Senator.
And I take it as an originalist, you would accept that the founders would have never subscribed to the idea that a president in their time could have accepted a multi-hundred-million-dollar gift from a foreign state.
Senator, the premise of your question implicates live issues in the public and pursuant to the canons of judicial ethics.
Well, let me just ask you, would the founders have believed that if a president received 100 camels from a foreign state, that that was an emolument?
Senator, it's difficult to answer that question in the
Is it, though, as
abstract.
an originalist? Isn't it pretty simple? You've got the clear language of the Constitution.
Senator, one has to look at the language, but also the history surrounding the Emoluments Clause in order to discern the
I am looking at the history. Let me move on to another question. As an originalist, do you believe that the Obergefell versus Hodges decision affirming constitutional right to same-sex marriage, was that wrongly decided?
Senator, Obergefell versus Hodges is binding precedent of the Supreme Court.
I'm aware of that. Do you believe it was wrongly decided?
Senator, as a circuit judge, I would be bound to follow
I understand that, but that's not responsive to my question. Had you been on the Court of Appeals prior to that decision, would you have decided the case that way?
Senator, prior to Obergefell versus Hodges, there was a prior Supreme Court case addressing the issue, and I would have followed that case.
Well, would you have reached the same conclusion as the Supreme Court in Obergefell?
Senator, I would have followed binding precedent.
You're not answering my question. Would you have reached the same conclusion?
Senator, the conclusions that the two precedents reached were potentially in conflict, and I would have to follow the precedent that...
So you can't tell us at this point whether you would have reached the same conclusion as the Supreme Court in Obergefell. So let me ask you about the Supreme Court's decision in Lawrence affirming a constitutional right to be intimate among same-sex couples. Do you believe that was wrongly decided?
Senator, Lawrence versus Texas is a binding precedent of the Supreme Court.
Again, I'm aware of that, but I'm asking you whether you believe that was rightly decided or wrongly decided.
Senator, you're asking about my personal views.
No, I'm asking you about your legal views. I'm asking about your legal views. Let me ask you about another case. Do you believe that Loving versus Virginia, which affirmed an interracial couple's right to marry, was that wrongly decided?
Senator, my wife and I are an interracial couple, and so if that case were wrongly decided, I would be in big trouble.
Okay, so you do agree with the reasoning of that case, and you're willing to say that. I appreciate that. But you're unwilling to say that you agree that Obergefell and Lawrence were correctly decided. Why is that?
Senator, again, those decisions are binding precedent of the Supreme Court, and I would be
No,
bound
I'm
to
aware of
follow.
that. So is Loving. And you're willing to tell us that you believe Loving was correctly decided, but you're not willing to say the other decisions were correctly decided. That seems less originalist and more situational. Let me ask you this about your role in the brief in Moore versus Harper. This was a case involving the discredited independent state legislature theory, which would allow a state legislature, even in the absence of a governor's signature, to effectively overturn an election. Do you believe that the Supreme Court wrongly decided Moore v. Harper when it rejected your view?
Senator, again, Moore v. Harper is binding precedent of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, no, I get that, but you're still not answering my question. So let me ask you a different way. If a state legislature decided after an election to pass a bill, even in the absence of a governor signing it, to throw out absentee ballots that were mailed prior to the election but arrived after the election, would it be your view that a state Supreme Court or federal court would have to allow the legislature to overturn the election, would be powerless to correct that effort to overturn a free and fair election?
Senator, Moore versus Harper states that state courts can review what the state legislatures have passed as a matter of the Constitution.
No, I'm aware of that. And my concern, though, is that your unwillingness to embrace the reasoning of these decisions means that where there is room, and there is room in all of these decisions, and most particularly Moore v. Harper, for you as a court of appeals judge to narrow these decisions, it sounds like you'll take that opportunity to narrow those rights. And in the case of Moore, which I agree with Judge Ledick, the most important case to our democracy in a century, narrowing that decision means empowering state legislatures to overturn election results, and I cannot imagine a more dangerous idea on the bench. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
This was not just political theater. It was a defining moment. Despite the intense questioning, Mr. Tong remained composed and demonstrated a deep respect for judicial ethics, history, and constitutional boundaries. His refusal to offer personal opinions on active legal issues showed discipline, not evasion, underscoring his commitment to fairness and impartiality in every case that reaches his courtroom. By affirming the validity of Loving v. Virginia, he revealed both personal understanding and principled respect for foundational civil rights. His careful approach to precedent illustrated a judge who prioritizes stability, consistency, and the rule of law over political or ideological pressure. Throughout the hearing, he showed that originalism, when practiced responsibly, can coexist with compassion, nuance, and constitutional growth. In the end, Mr. Tong's thoughtful restraint highlighted the qualities of a judge who interprets the law with integrity rather than impulse.